My first question is regarding this collaborations box set, which is available on Burning Shed, and I will put the link just below this video. Is this collaborations box set? What exactly is it, and what has prompted you to collate this material now?
The story probably goes back. I'll do my usual sort of long, convoluted thing. I always end up thinking I should ask a question a certain way and then end up about 10 years before.
Okay.
But it goes back to the From a Page box set that I did with Yes.
Okay.
Once I'd done that work, the management company asked me if there was anything else that I had. And I had the albums with Clive Nolan, which was the Tales by Gaslight box set that came out. And so it really developed from them. You know, that one sold well. And they said, well, what else have you got? And I suddenly thought, well, there's still a few solo records and things that have been out of print for a while. Yeah. And I thought, what have I got that works together in a sort of collection? And then when I think I was doing an interview or talking to somebody, and they sort of said, oh, you've been quite fortunate, haven't you, in so much as the people you've managed to play with. And I said, yeah, I'm probably one of the few people that's played with all three Yes guitarists, you know, Steve Howe, Peter Banks from playing on the Jabberwocky records, and Trevor Rabin joined us on a show when we were playing with Yes. He joined us to play on Lonely Heart the Greeks. I mean, so I thought, oh, I'm quite lucky to play with three wonderful players like that. Yeah. And then they said, oh, but in Gordon Giltrap, and I thought, oh, actually, thinking about it, you know, there are the albums I did with Steve Howe and the albums that I did with Gordon. That is kind of like collaboration albums, and maybe that's a good idea. And we just sort of talked about these collaboration albums, and eventually it just sort of turned into this box set called Collaborations, because we were trying to work out what we could do. And then somebody wrote to me, one of the mixing desk guys from one of the shows we did, and said that he'd found a multi-track of an acoustic show we'd done. So we were able to put a live album together as well of Gordon and I. So we ended up with these sort of three albums. Right. In a box set, and it sort of took form from there, really. So it was quite it seemed quite organic, actually. It seemed quite a natural way for it to follow on from the one with Clive.
Sure. So it's very guitar. It's almost quite guitar centered as well, is it? These albums.
Well, I let them have a go. Well, I mean, the thing when you're playing with somebody like Steve and with Gordon Giltrap, they're such unique players that you can't help but get inspired by working with them. So whereas the Three Ages of Magic was very much my music with Steve, he was the executive producer, so he sat with me through all the pieces of music, discussed arrangements, worked out where guitars should go. So the pieces weren't built around guitars, they were built around the music that I'd written. Right. And he'd help me come together. We'd sit there and he'd go, don't think there's a right phrase for a solo there. And I said, well, solo works. He said, yeah, but we need to build the song more. We need to get more of the themes and the melodies, and then we go to solo. So he was doing a lot of that sort of stuff. And I was still in my, probably my mid-20s at that point. And he was sort of giving me some of the advice that he'd learned over the years. Yeah. He said, oh, I'll play on a track. And then before I knew it, he was playing on almost every track. Right. Whereas with Gordon, because the album with Steve was pre-Yes. The album with Steve was like 2001, so almost 7 years before I joined Yes. Yeah. And then when I left Yes, the first person that called me to work with was Gordon. Okay. And we played together briefly at a show my dad did, one Christmas show. And he said, would you play on a record of mine? I'm going to do a record next that's a bit rocky. Yeah. And I went, okay, great, yeah. And then he phoned me up the next day and he went, actually, let's not get you playing on my record. And I thought, oh, that's a shame. And he said, no, let's write a record together. So that record very much started off as the two of us throwing ideas together to see how it would gel. So they both have a different way that they evolved, but they equally ended up with similar levels of interaction from the guitarists, which is, I mean, I think guitars are fantastic instruments. I mean, let's be honest, other than a grand piano, they're nicer looking instruments than keyboards, aren't they?
They are. You can't do the Pete Townsend thing with the old grand piano, can you?
No, and they're a lot more expensive when you smash them up.
They are indeed. So actually, this box set is two albums brought together, and there's a disc of live stuff as well. That's previously been released. Is that right?
Yeah, we had we toured as a duo most of the time, and we did one band tour with the full band. Yeah. But in between, we did these very rare sort of trio shows where Paul Manzi, the singer, would join us on stage. And luckily, it was one of the shows that we recorded. And so we ended up with this album, which is sort of half pieces of music from our back catalogue,
Oh.
which are instrumental, and then half of them are vocal tracks with a couple of songs from the Ravens record, along with some tracks from all previous records of mine. So it was lovely to do it. And it was one of those nice things where we're doing a live album, and the live album isn't just the album that we just released live. You know, it was lots of other pieces there with reinterpretations. So it was lovely to do, actually. It's the usual thing. I start off thinking, oh, that'd be all right, nice little bootleg thing, and then suddenly actually listen to it and you go, no, we can make this so much nicer than just a off the desk recording. And because we had all the multi-tracks, we were able to go back and, you know, sort it properly, which was terrific.
Well, I'm certainly glad it's in the box set. I shall definitely pre-order mine anyway. What about I was interested in the Jabberwocky. I mean, it's a wonderful poem, and the other works of literature that you focus on. You did the Jabberwocky, the Hound of the Baskervilles, and Frankenstein, which didn't quite finish. Were there other texts that you considered doing of interest?
We did. We considered The Time Machine, but we weren't sure about that because the story didn't seem to work as well to the music we'd written. And also, my dad had done The Time Machine many years before. Right. One of his sort of lesser known concept records. It was in the late 80s, early 90s. He did that. Okay. So we thought about that. We were thinking of different Sherlock Holmes stories. So which is why this is from the Tales by Gaslight box set.
Yeah.
The third disc is the Dark Fables CD, which has the Frankenstein records, but also has a couple of extra tracks from Hound. And two of those, one's called 221B, and the other one is the Baker Street Irregulars. Yeah. 221B doesn't really appear in Hound of the Baskervilles, and the Baker Street Irregulars, which was the 12 children that he used to send off to find information out for him. They're not in Hound of the Baskervilles at all. And it's because when we were writing, we knew we wanted to write around Sherlock Holmes because we loved the Gothic imagery of that period of time. Sure. Because that lends itself beautifully to writing music. And we knew it'd be a Sherlock Holmes story of something. We weren't sure which one to do. And then we sort of settled on Hound of the Baskervilles. And I think that sort of came from when we realized that we were going to get the opportunity to work with Robert Powell as the narrator. And so that's why those pieces were sort of written, but not included on the record, because we were sort of umming and ahhing about what Sherlock Holmes story to do. I think Hound of the Baskervilles is just such a great one to do. And also, it's one of those stories that has quite a lot of characters, which helps us with the singing, having multiple singers on board. And obviously, all the roles in there are quite. There's quite a lot of interplay and intricacy between the way the characters interact, which lends itself nicely to writing sort of duets and multi-voice pieces.
I suppose it does, and the Jabberwocky's quite an interesting piece as well. I think it was. I think that's my favourite one in that box set, the Jabberwocky. I really enjoyed that one. How much did you have to pay your father to get involved with that then?
That was I think that was a favour which I'm probably still going to have to repay at some point. That Jabberwocky, oddly enough, we were going to do Sherlock Holmes first.
Okay, yeah.
So we had the idea of doing Sherlock Holmes first, and then we ended up trying to work out covers. We're both fans of decent record sleeves. I'm always fastidious about record sleeves because I remember as a kid growing up, and my dad, when he came back from Switzerland and was married to Nina, who was his third wife, they had a house in Camberley, and I cannot remember the number of times that I'd see him get a package, open it up, and go, oh, they've mucked up the artwork again. And he was seeing the artwork for the first time when the record was almost going to press and going, I hate it. And I was sort of thinking to myself, you need to be involved in that process all the way along. So for me, when we started working on this, we said, well, who should we get to do the artwork for the record? Because we feel that's really important, particularly into sort of that prog rock environment. That really sets the scene. So we were thinking, who do we know? And I said to Clive that I know Rodney Matthews. I actually did art and design in college, so my diploma in graphic design. But I did my final year essay on Rodney Matthews. Right. Now, I think all my tutors were expecting me to do Roger Dean because of the Yes connection, but I went for Rodney Matthews. And he was so nice to me, and he wrote me letters and sent me books and posters and stuff so I could really interpret his work. And then when we came to be doing the Jabberwocky, I said, well, I do have Rodney Matthews' number. I can give him a call and see if he would, license us one of his images. And we'll see what he's got. And we were toying with the idea of Jabberwocky, and we were toying with the idea of Sherlock Holmes, because we knew the Jabberwocky we could write a story around. We were unsure which way to go. And I phoned up Rodney, and I sort of said, the usual catch-up sort of thing. And I said, look, we're doing a record.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, we're thinking of doing Sherlock Holmes. I said, what are you working? He said, he said, well, I've just finished a piece on the Jabberwocky. He said, it's literally just gone up into the gallery. He said, I finished it a couple of weeks ago. And I was like, well, that decides it for us. If I said, would you license us, the rights to use it for the cover? He said, yeah, of course I would. So it was, complete luck that he'd done it at that time. And it just sort of fell into place. And
Sure.
so he said, I said, well, I haven't seen it. And he said, well, I'll send you a poster through the post. And I remember Clive and I opening it. We just opened it and our, jaws dropped. It's still my favorite painting that he's done. I have a wonderful print of it on outside my office. And that was it. And then of course music just came flowing.
Sure.
Once you see that imagery and you see the character and you sort of go, oh yeah, I can see this. And then it just took life. I mean, I think Rodney's image as well helped us think of it more in a Hound of the Baskervilles, a very dark, very gothic sort of album, whereas the Jabberwocky had a bit more lightness to it. I think it was not quite comic book, but it was a lot more sort of almost like an animated type story. It was that sort of feel to it, so it wasn't quite as dark and heavy.
I mean, it's interesting you talk about the your father's reaction to the album covers. I mean, it goes back to a generation where we had a much more tactile relationship with music. It was all about the album cover and listening to the music, and you actually had to get up and turn the blessed thing over and things like that. But it brings me on to the subject of streaming in some respects. I just wonder how you feel about it. I've just read a biography of Roger Daltrey, and he described streaming as sanctioned theft is all it is. I don't know if you feel as negative about it as he does.
He probably earns more money from streaming than I do. I find it, I mean, I'm the same as anybody. I've streamed music through Apple or wherever. And sometimes it's a really good way of discovering records that you'd never thought of buying.
Yeah.
And so for somebody of my sort of age and our era of music fans, I think maybe we use streaming. I certainly use streaming as a way of sort of listening to something and going, oh, I'm going to buy that. I almost use it like the listening posts from a record shop.
Right.
And it's like, oh, I haven't heard that record before. I was thinking about it the other day. I was trying to find, I could never find a Steve Hillage record I was looking for. And I sort of found it streaming and I listened to it and went, yeah, I still love it as much as I did when I had the vinyl 30 years ago. I'm going to go and buy that.
Yeah.
I think my problem comes more from the fact that people use it in a different way. They just listen to it and it's disposable. Whereas for me, it's a route to going and getting the physical item, which I love. I mean, I still have CDs everywhere. CDs there, there's CDs in my other room, they're everywhere. My son, who's 16, listens to loads of streaming stuff and he's just starting to go, oh, I might buy that record. And I agree with you completely on the tactile relationship with something. I was talking to a friend the other day and he said, I don't feel like I own a record if I just stream it. He said, I don't feel that sense of ownership or commitment to it that you do when you get a physical item.
I get sent a lot of MP3 files to review, and I listen to them and write a response. But I feel much closer to the music if I've actually got it in my hand as well, kind of as a physical object, if that makes sense.
I think it's massively important. So when I was doing the box sets, the one thing that I felt was really important, particularly with Tales by Gaslight and collaborations, was I wrote to all the artists and I said, look, your artwork is such a big part of the record. Do you mind if I put I was going to make miniature wallets of all the records anyway. So do you mind if I put miniature art prints in as well? Because I think, that makes it really nice. And I wanted a booklet for each of the records. And I wrote, background information and stories behind all the records and where the songs came from. So the new live album on the collaborations thing, Gordon and I both went back through all the songs that were played live and what made us choose those songs for the record. And in Dark Fables, both Clive and I wrote our memories of working together on those records. And I think that's massively important because I'm the same as you. I like to get something. And I want to immerse myself in the creation of what was going on through the people's minds. I want to see photographs of them working. I want to see photographs of what the studio is like. I like that whole that whole feel you get from a record.
Yeah.
And I was talking to somebody the other day, and I said, when I was younger, much younger, and I used to go to parties and stuff, one of the great ways that you could talk to somebody was you'd often find yourself stood by the CD collection, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you'd be looking at something, somebody would come up next to you and you say, oh, look, they got the Floyd record up there, that new one.
Yeah.
Actually, that's how old it was, the new Floyd record. and somebody else to go, oh, yeah, I want to hear that. You say, oh, you like Floyd, do you? Yeah, but Supertramp there, I love that record. And you create a connection. You find a shared relationship that you can start a conversation and potentially start a friendship from.
You do.
Whereas you would never go out to somebody now and say, oh, could you pass me your phone? I just want to flick through your iTunes. you wouldn't do that. You'd feel that's an invasion of privacy. So I like things on a wall, records out, that people can get a sense of who you are as a character. I think it's massively important. And so I will cling on to releasing CDs for as long as I can.
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, so one of my, I remember being in awe of the when Pink Floyd's The Wall came out. We're going back a few years now, of course, but just in awe of that opening up and that Gerald Scarfe artwork. It was just absolutely great. It was an experience in itself before you actually listened to any of the music. It was just remarkable. Going a bit off script here, actually, I was going to ask you, how did you get Robert Powell on board for this thing, this Hound of Battles?
I had met him. I've met him a couple of times. He was a friend of Dad's. He did the narration for Dad's album that Dad wrote about the Gospels. So he did all the Bible readings in that record. Yeah. And so he'd known Dad for years. And I think he was also at Dad's third marriage. He was there at he's as one of those great stories where apparently he turned up at the church, and the people at the entrance to the church asked if he was going for Dad's side or bride or groom, and he just said, I've got a season ticket, and sort of strolled through. and so I'd sort of bumped into him on multiple occasions, and then Dad got asked to do This Is Your Life, which for the people that watch this that aren't from the UK is a TV show where they surprise a celebrity and talk about their life and get lots of people back together.
Back a few years, so This Is Your Life. How long's that been off the air now?
Oh, I dread to think. I mean, I did it about 20 years ago.
Yeah, okay.
I think about 20 years ago, maybe a bit longer than that, 25 maybe. And I remember that he was there, and we got chatting at the after party. And he sort of said, oh, if you ever need me for anything, give me a call. I went, yeah, okay. People say that sort of stuff all the time. Yeah. And then Dad was doing a launch for the Return to the Centre of the Earth, I think, that was coming out at the same time as Jabberwocky. Yeah. And obviously, we were a small label putting out Jabberwocky, and Dad had E&I behind him shoving Return to the Centre of the Earth out. So, our launch party, I think, was Clive and I having a beer down the local pub. Dad's launch party was the National History Museum. And so Clive and I went along to it, and Robert was there. And I just got chatting to him again and said, look, he said, don't forget me if you ever want me to narrate on a record. I don't know whether he was feeling put out because Dad had used, I can't remember the guy's name.
I can't remember.
Patrick Stewart. He'd used Patrick Stewart on.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. And so I don't know what Rob was thinking, but he said, if you ever need me for a narrator, don't forget. And I went, well, actually, we're doing Sherlock Holmes next. He went, I'll do it. And I said, we haven't got much money. I can't afford to pay you a lot. And he went, doesn't matter. He said, I want to do it. And I said, why are you so keen to do it? He said, well, I played Sherlock Holmes on the stage. This way I'll be one of the few actors that's played Sherlock and Holmes. Yeah, so that was his driving thought behind it. And he was really keen to do it, and said, gave me his number and said, right, let me know. And he turned up on the day that we booked him in. He came and read everything. He was brilliant. He turned up and was, how do you want me to pronounce things? Do you want hotel or do you want hotel? Do you want Old English where H's weren't? And we were like, yeah.
Whatever.
Do what you think is right. And yeah, he was great.
Yeah. I was going to ask you actually what it was like working with Peter Banks. I've only ever heard good things about him generally, but I was just wondering what your experience of working with Peter Banks was like.
He was lovely. I met Peter at the Classic Rock Society, again, an English organisation that no longer exists, but were very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Were very, very enthusiastic of new young artists coming through into the sort of prog rock world. And they were one of the few organisations around in the sort of 80s and 90s that were helping keep this, having an outlet for musicians that wanted to get into that world, because at the time it really wasn't a particularly favourable time for prog rock.
Yeah.
And it was also pre-nostalgia world, which is where all that stuff sort of just didn't exist. And not that nostalgia didn't exist, don't make myself clear here. Nostalgia has always existed, but nostalgia for rock bands wasn't the thing at the time.
No.
And they used to have these award nights, and they invited Peter Banks up one time to give out the awards. And he and I got chatting. We got on very well. And then we just kept in touch. And then when it came to doing the Jabberwocky album, I think both Clive and I asked him independently, would you be interested in doing it? And he was, straight up for it. And we caught him at a particularly good time in his life, I think. He was just recently married. Mm-hmm. He was releasing his Harmony in Diversity album he was doing. Yeah. He was doing a lot of putting an instrumental band together. So he was off playing. And he was a bit of a hero to some of us, because he was, one of the early players in Yes.
Sure.
So even though he didn't sort of have the fame that the others had, we all sort of respected the fact that he'd been there at the beginning of this sort of genre that we loved. Mm-hmm. So he was, we just loved working with him. And he just came in and was just brilliant, because the way we work, or a lot of musicians work, is you'll write a solo. You might be lucky and get a great solo first time. Or you start building a solo, you write a little section, you think, oh, it's good, and you keep building on top of it, and eventually you end up with a nice melodic solo that you think works. Peter would come in and we said, right, it's this like 32 bar solo, off you go. And he went, this amazing thing. And we went, oh, it was great. That first bit was brilliant. And the bit you did towards the end, could you do that? And then, we'll tidy the other bits up. And he went, okay. And then played something completely different again. And we ended up with like 32 just great jazz solos.
Right.
But he never played the same thing again. He'd never learned a bit. He was just pure improvisation. So we ended up having to sort of cherry pick the best bits of his guitar stuff.
Oh, okay.
And I remember all the demo songs that I'd done, wherever his guitar was going to be, I'd put a solo in of some form, maybe a keyboard sax solo to say I want it to be a bit jazzy here, or there was another song where I'd sort of I played a bit of guitar myself and just did a sort of traditional guitar solo. But whatever he delivered was not what I was expecting, and was infinitely better than anything I could have expected. You just listen to it. Like he did the solo on Coming to Town, which is just blows my mind every time. The amount of times I've sat with guitarists that have had to try and learn that solo and go, what is he doing? Just had this ability to play around a beat that just sounded so unique. It was great. Great.
Certainly that early Yes sound was quite distinctive, I think. It's certainly in the keyboard sound as well. As well as the guitar, it changed so much. I think obviously when Steve Howe came on board, and of course Rick Wakeman in '72, he joined in '72. That's right. I was going to ask about Lockdown. Actually, Lockdown. There's this whole subgenre now of Lockdown albums. There's quite a few of them. I think years to come, it'll kind of form its own sort of genre. I'm just wondering how Lockdown was for you. I mean, creatively, that is. Sorry.
Well, the Tales by Gaslight album I worked a lot on during lockdown. So that was sort of my lockdown period, which was finding the pieces, the Frankenstein pieces that had disappeared, which Clive and I thought we didn't think we'd written anything for Frankenstein. We thought we'd done maybe a piece or two. And then, so when the management company said, oh, let's follow up the Yes box set with something else. And we said, oh, well, I could tell we got these albums that Clive and I did. And they said, oh, have you got anything else that we could put out as a third disc? And Clive and I went, I have a couple of demos, a few bits and pieces. And then when we went through our folder, we realized we'd written quite a lot for the third album that we'd never been able to secure the funding for.
Right.
And so that's really what I spent the first bit of lockdown working on, was going through and sorting through files. It was a bit like a bit of a gift of time to actually go through and actually go, actually, that was a really good idea. And music's meant to be heard. It's we're all slightly egotistical. We write it because we want people to listen to it. Because my son always says to me, "So why did you write that piece?" I said, "Because no one else had." That's why I wrote it. No one else had it, and I wrote it because I wanted to hear it. And we're lucky enough to work in an environment where people can hear what you do. Sure. And so for me, was really a case of like rediscovering some of these pieces that I knew at the time had a little spark of something that excited me. And yeah, so it was the same thing sort of lockdown for me. And then, of course, I then started doing the same thing with collaborations. So it was a great opportunity to revisit records and remaster records that I hadn't listened to in a long time. And
get a bit of housekeeping done.
It was a little bit like that. And it was, I think the thing is, over time, I've been doing this, you know, on and off now for my first record was in '97. So we're going up for 25 years, actually, my 25-year anniversary. There we go. And over 25 years, you put out a lot of records, a lot of bits and pieces. And I've always found that when you try to discover a new artist or you find somebody you like, and you try and understand their work, sometimes it can be a bit all over the place. You've got really no idea what followed what, who was on what record. And I kind of like the idea of being able to try and collate all my work.
Sure.
Boxes where somebody could go, actually, I really like that album that he did. What else can I find? And they go, oh, I can find all the things. And then they can sort of work through like I used to as a kid. So, oh, it's the same engineer that's been on all those records. And, oh, that guitarist came back for that thing. I like all that sort of stuff. So I suppose it's my own sort of way of, sort of housekeeping and tidying up my catalogue, you know, because I think I'd like to do another one after this box set, which will be all the records that are solo records that have just been with my band and you know, bands that I put together. So that's the sort of elimination of the next one.
Sure. Well, I was going to actually ask you about your collaboration with Gordon Giltrap. I mean, first of all, how did that come about? And are there any plans to work with any other renowned guitarists at all?
Well,
Steve Hackett, for example, or
no, Steve Hackett. Oddly enough, I did. I used to do his tour posters years ago. Like I said to you before, I qualified as graphic design. He was one of my first pieces of freelance work. Was doing his tour programs.
Okay.
So a long time ago, but I've met Steve quite a few times actually. He's very nice. I don't know whether I've ever approached him to work on something. I'd like to.
Yeah.
He's a phenomenal guitarist. There's some other guitarists I'd like to work with. Some very talented, you know, other people as well that are around that I'd like to work with. But Trevor Rabin, I always kind of like the idea of recording something with. But
sure,
you know, I think he might have had his fill of Yes type stuff now. And I've done, I mean, other people that I'd liked working with. I've done a few bits with John Anderson over the years, which I don't think have ever seen the light of day. Okay. So that's been fun to do some of his stuff. There's so many amazing musicians out there that it would be difficult to just choose one person. I think I've always sort of chosen guitarists because I think if you get the balance right, the complementary approach that keyboards and guitars can have if they are equally weighted, can really enhance music. I remember listening to, it was probably Marillion when I was a teenager. Mr. Rothery, when I first got into Marillion, probably when I was about 17, I think they were almost at the point of breaking up. But so I had that lovely period of being able to find 4 albums, and the live album and the Besides Themselves record. And suddenly, I remember saying to somebody, "God, listen to that! The keyboards and the guitar are equal," and that was amazing to me. And that was like, wow, I want to hear more bands of which these instruments are equal, rather than the keyboards are just a side instrument or something shoved to the back of the mix. And that's what really excited me about it. So I think that's why in later years I've liked working with guitarists that are open-minded to those two instruments working together. And I mean, Steve Howe used to say it to me. He said, what's great about these instruments is that one minute you're up front giving it everything to the audience, next minute you're back and you're locked in with a bass player or a drummer, and you're creating the groove for someone else to have their moment. I remember thinking that's absolutely right. The instruments should always play different roles. They're not just, look at me, I'm lead guitarist, I'm out front all the time, and you lot are all my backing band. It's not that attitude. It's and I think that's why I've always sort of liked working with guitarists, but good singers, great singers are always important as well.
I mean, would it be guitarists that are primarily within a kind of a progressive rock genre? I mean, you couldn't imagine moving over to like a blues, like doing something with Keith Richards, maybe that wouldn't probably work.
Do you know, I spent my formative years in a blues band and I absolutely loved it. I used to play
Let's give him a call then.
Yeah, he's playing a blues band for many years. In fact, it was my wife that got me out of playing in the blues band, because she said, "Look, you're writing all these records. I think it's about time you went out and played your own stuff instead of going out and playing all this blues stuff every night." But I used to love it, you know.
Yeah.
I used to. I mean, to be honest with you, when I was 16, I was playing in blues bands. I'd finish school, jump in a bus with a bunch of people that are much older than me. They'd drive me around the country. I'd play pubs, theatres, radio shows all over the place. Couple of beers, got back late, sleep, up, school. It was
sounds fabulous. Sounds fabulous. I was going to ask you. I mean, Yes have a kind of a reputation for being particularly fractious. What was the atmosphere like when you were working in Yes? There were no fisticuffs or anything, were there?
No, up to the bit where it all went. When I stopped working with them, up to that point, it was fabulous. I really genuinely, I'd sort of grown up with these people constantly falling out or fighting. The stories that I heard, I'd heard from the tour manager, you'd go to a restaurant and 5 of them would be sat at different tables. And when I joined, it was a bit when, obviously, I joined when John was still in the band, and then John got ill and left, and then Benoit came in. So although we never played a note, I was in the band for a year before we'd even played together. But when I joined, I saw Chris, Steve and Alan have to put aside any sort of animosity is the wrong word, but any difficulties that they'd had over the years. And I don't know what they were, whatever problems they'd encountered over the years that had made them leave the band or whatever. Yeah. They kind of had to put all that to one side, because they didn't have John there leading the charge. I think most people know John sort of led the Yes charge. So when John wasn't there, they suddenly had to work together and agree things together to make it move forward. And they also knew that, it was a similar position to when Trevor and Jeff joined the band, when Dan and John first left, is that they were suddenly on their own again. Yeah. And I think, the Trevor and Jeff thing, regardless of how drama is regarded now by certain parts of the fan base, at the time, I know that it was a difficult period for the band. Yeah. And obviously wasn't received well enough for the record companies to keep them on and keep it going. Yeah. So I think they had it in their head. It was a bit like, we're taking another chance here. So we can't muck it up. We've got to really work together and make it work. So I saw them have lots of very constructive conversations. Everybody gave each other their space. Everybody knew what made the other person tick. Steve liked to travel to shows on his own. He liked to do things his own way. And Chris and Alan, liked to work together and travel together. And but what I did, when I got there, I thought, I'd worked with Steve for many years, but I thought, I'm not going to be just, Steve's friend here. I'm going to get to know Chris, and I'm going to get to know Alan and get to know Benoit. And I got to know Paul, the tour manager, and we all had a great time. Sometimes it'd be Alan, me, Paul and Benoit going out for a meal. I'd sit down and have a meal with Steve regularly. Chris and I would often sit there and chat, and I'd often go out shopping with his wife Scotty. We spent so much time in the shops on tour, and it was lovely. And we everybody looked forward to seeing each other at the next tour. Everybody was, and Chris came to me once and he said, "You know what?" He said, "I don't think there's a track in the Yes catalogue that this band couldn't do justice to now." And I took that as such a great compliment, and we were always so, there was never really any rows or anything like that. So whether I just got lucky, but it was a particularly nice period of time working, and it was, it's really nice to see them work together and, watch the interplay on stage. It was great. I mean, best seat in the house. I get to stand up on the side of the stage and watch Chris, Steve and Alan interact with each other. Yeah.
I mean, you made the point about that there isn't a Yes song we couldn't do justice to. How difficult was it? Because obviously you're coming to that band, you've got to learn a repertoire that spans quite a few different keyboard players. How difficult was it did you have to adjust your playing styles for that, or did you just amalgamate and make it yours?
Well, the learning bit, the difficulty with the learning bit is they didn't decide on the set list until 2 weeks before rehearsals were due to start. Yeah. So I got given, 2 weeks before the rehearsal started, got to say, right, this is what we're doing. And they sent me a load of CDs. And then I was sort of sat in the UK, and the rehearsals were going to happen in Canada. So I had about a week to myself to sit and sort of sketch out the rough forms of the tracks. And, you know, contrary to what a lot of people will probably think, is I didn't phone up Dad and say, hey, how does And You and I go? You know,
Yeah.
But the other thing is, well, I hadn't grown up playing these pieces either. I'd never played it. Yes, I'd listened to it, but I'd never sat down and played it. And any musician will be able to say, you know, there's a big difference between listening to a piece of music and analyzing a piece of music to take it apart, you know, when you actually have to, you know, dissect it.
Sure.
So I turned up in Canada, had a brand new keyboard rig of parts of my keyboards, bits that have, you know, I'd been sent by various keyboard companies. Korg were very, very helpful. And I had a new keyboard tech was coming along on the board. And I'd also said to the band, you know, how are we going to approach this? How do you want me to approach this? Because I'd noticed over the years when I'd listened to live records, you know, Dad in particular would improvise certain solos and play different things, and which is fine. He's got the right to do that. He wrote the original one, so if he wants to play a different one, great. I didn't feel that I could come into the band and start making up my own solos. Right. That the audience wouldn't expect to hear my solos. They would want to hear the Yes solos. So I thought, well, I said to the band that I think I should go back and play everything as it was on the original records, because it probably hasn't been played like that for a long time.
Oh.
And they said, yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what we want as well. And I said, great. Okay. So I'll just learn from the original records. They went, no, but we want to keep the arrangements that we've done in later years, because, you know, Roundabout has a different arrangement in the center sections. Little bits were different in Close to the Edge. And I went, okay, well, is there a recording of anything like that? And they went, no. So I sort of had to so I had to learn the original records, and then I had to learn play along with the live records, interdispersing the original record bits over the bits that were being improvised and changed. Sure. So I never actually played any of these tracks until we sat down into the first rehearsals, and they said, well, we got to rehearsals, and it's like, right, we got 2 weeks. I thought, okay, 2 weeks. God, and it was a 3.5 hour set or something, I think we learned. Yeah. And okay, 3.5 hours set, and we've got 14 days. And then it was like, you know, Chris has a reputation of not sort of starting early. Yeah. And I said, what time do we start? I said, about 8 o'clock. And he said, let's make it about 1. So it's like, okay. And then we'll stop about 5. I thought, I can't, you know, we can't do 2 weeks of just 4 hours and get through a set. We're just not going to do it. And he said, oh, and by the way, Thursday, we're just doing a photo shoot, so we won't rehearse at all on Thursday. And I thought, oh, okay, so, and I'm sort of still trying, of course, to work out this new rig and what sounds are we going to use. So I thought, right, well, I'm going to make all the keyboard rig really authentic. I'm going to have just strings over there. I'm going to have organs, pianos, a multi-purpose synth, the Moog. I'm going to have a set wherever I think I need something. So we get a sort of standard sound across the set. And I would go in at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock every morning and just play along to the records with the keyboard rig and just keep going and going and going and going. And you know, we got it together for the first show, and it went down really well the first show. And I think by about show 5, 6, you hit a point at a band where you go, that's it. We understand each other now. You've built up enough trust and understanding of how the other people in the band work, react, you know. And so by that show 5, we were starting to really get that feeling. But it was an awful lot to learn, and it was, there were lots of notes stuck on keyboards, and you know, just to remind me.
I was going to ask you actually about Ravens and Lullabies. I mean, how did what is the central idea behind that record, or the theme or concept, and how did it come about?
Oh well, the title Ravens and Lullabies is basically when Gordon and I actually goes back to the Yes record. When we started writing the Yes record that ended up being From a Page, Steve and I talked about the idea of trying to almost reboot the band in the same way that they did when Dad joined, which was maybe make some band songs and then individual people's songs. So it might not have been solos in the way that Fragile was done, but it might have been a Steve song, an Oliver song, a Chris song, and then big songs that the band collaborated on.
Sure.
So we would do it that way, so that, you know, individuals and band. And that all got blown out the water when Trevor Horn came on board and wanted to do his thing. So when I ended up working with Gordon, even though he had sort of 3-4 classic rock albums from the 70s with a band, he'd predominantly for the last 30 years been an acoustic guitar player on his own. So his audience were expecting any record he did to be acoustic. And I said, look, if we just put out another acoustic record, you're just doing the same thing again. And he wanted to do something a bit more rocky and a bit more up tempo. And I said, look, if we don't want to alienate people, they're going to want a certain element of acoustic music on there. But I also think if we're going to try and appeal to a bigger prog audience as well, we need to put some vocal songs, do songs that are a bit longer form, you know, stretch the instrument a little bit. And he was up for that. And I said, well, look, this way we can appeal to your fans, not alienate them, and branch out as well. And I said, look, because it's an idea that we had with Yes as well. And he was like, okay, yeah, no, that sounds like a good idea. And I think I'd written the line somewhere, Ravens and Lullabies. I often scribble stuff down, and I wanted like a polar opposites, but I didn't want it to be black or white or night or day. I wanted something that was a bit more evocative imagery.
Sure.
And I was going through, obviously I'd left Yes. My head was swimming a bit. I wasn't in the best of places. My brain was trying to process a lot of information, and everything was a bit, what's going on in the world? Everything just feels a bit weird. And I felt like that thing of your brain just never standing still.
Sure.
And so whenever we did the acoustic pieces, it felt like everything was calming down, like Lullabies. And I thought, oh, I like Lullabies. And then I think I came up with the idea of a raven. I think I saw some ravens flowing around something. And it was like, oh, that looks like how my brain is going at the moment, trying to understand everything that's happened. And I got this idea of ravens and lullabies. That's a really nice idea. The ravens would be the rock songs that are trying to explain problems in the world or stories, and, you know, and the lullabies are the pieces. And then we thought, well, if we just did one after the other, we sort of do a hard-hitting piece or a piece that has a lyrical story, and then we gently, you know, calm the listener down again, and then we hit them with another piece, and then we calm them down. And we did this throughout the record, and that was the thing for it. So it meant when we toured, we could either tour as a sort of the Ravens band or as the Lullabies band. So, you know, when we did the full band, it was the Ravens band, and when we did the Lullabies, it was Gordon and I going out as an acoustic duo. So it allowed us to do it that way round, which is where it came from. Then I found this wonderful artist, Liliana Sanchez, who'd done this wonderful painting of a girl with her hair down and her hands over her eyes with these birds flying around her head. And I thought, oh, that just summed it up beautifully. So that's where the story came from it, because I love albums that have themes. I'm not really a great fan of albums where you just chuck 12 of your songs onto it.
You like the concept albums and things like that?
I like the concept album, even if the music isn't concepty in itself. I like the idea that an album is a collection of something. It's written around a certain period of time. It has a theme. It has a feel to it. Something like that, I think, is really important. It's important to me anyway. Other artists, have completely different feel. But of course, every album that I do is probably slightly different to the previous one as well. So they have to sort of sit comfortably as a piece of work.
Well, I've got one question that I always ask when I do these interviews, that I always finish on this one, is if you could collaborate with anybody, we can go down the fantasy route if you want, living or dead, who would it be?
Oh God, that's a really difficult. Do you know, there's one part of me that there's one regret I have in life, which is that I never got to play with John Wetton.
Okay,
and John was he was very supportive of me. And I got to know him on the Yes Asia tour back in 2009. And people know that John had various problems, didn't drink around that time, all that sort of stuff. So when we were on tour, I don't drink either. And so when we were touring as Yes in Asia, we would often find ourselves at breakfast time together. We would sit and we would chat and we chat. And then we suddenly found ourselves hanging out more and more. We got talking, and then whenever we were on a flight, he would sit there and he would give me advice about my career and say, "You should do this and try this." And Don't be afraid to blah, 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 blah. And he would give me all this sort of stuff. And I really enjoyed talking to him. And then when I stopped working with Yes, because the people that know that story is that Trevor Horn came on board and wanted Jeff Downes back in the band so they could work on music that they'd done. And I ended up sort of having to leave. John was really supportive about that. He took me to one side and said, I don't like the way this is all happening. So I think it's, he was just very, very supportive of the situation. And so when I ended up going out with Gordon to do the Ravens and Lullabies tour, he phoned me up and he said, "Oh, look, you're playing near me tomorrow." I said, "Oh, great. Do you want to come along?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll come." And he said, "Do you want me to come up and sing?" And, he just wanted to do anything to sort of encourage and help. And he came up and we did Heat of the Moment with him, which was lovely. And I remember thinking, I've always admired his songwriting. I've always thought he's an amazing songwriter. And I always credit him with the need that I have when I write a song is to make sure the melody of the verses and the chorus is as strong as I can make it. Because I know a lot of rock musicians, particularly who are virtuistic musicians, they write a song because they want to get to their solo, or they want to show off and show how clever they are, which is fine. Some people are great at that. And I'm like that as well. I want to show off and play my stuff and do my thing. But I also want to make the song the most important thing as well. And John always taught me, not him sitting down and telling me this, it was just what I could hear in the way he wrote music. It was like the song is the key, the melody that he sings is the bit that. So whenever I've written a song, I've always sort of thought, how would John do that? Would John be happy with that melody you've come up with? And I think so. No, he would change something. He would do. So he's always sort of in my subconscious of my sort of my sort of teacher checking my work.
Sure.
So and I always thought to myself, God, I'd love to have written with John at some point. And then, of course, he got ill and passed away. And so
he was a great bass. He was a great bass player, though. I mean, I was listening to some of the Uriah Heep albums he played on, and you can really feel his contribution to that music as well. It's remarkable.
I mean, I genuinely watched Asia most nights when I was on that tour. I would sit there and watch them play, just because I grew up with their music. I love the music. I listened to the records. I had, all the ones that they'd worked on with John up to Astra. I remember getting Astra even after Steve Howard left. And, I remember I bought that in America on the ABWH tour. I went out to see some of the shows. I remember buying Astra in a record shop in Dallas, I think it was, at the age of 16. Bizarre what you've done.
It's funny, a few people, whenever I asked this question, have actually said, "Oh, I would love to have collaborated with Miles Davis." And I thought, well, are you sure? Because I've heard he was a real bugger to work with, apparently. But apparently, everyone who worked with him left him a better musician in some respects. But
I get that. I mean, I've been quite lucky as well in my career that I've always worked with people that were older than me in the majority of the time.
Yeah.
So even in that blues band I was talking about, in the blues bands I used to play with, they were all 10, 15 years older than me. And I remember, I would learn so much from them. I'd learn how to perform on stage, how to watch other people's hands on instruments, watch the turns, watch for the feel, watch for when they think they're going to change something, watch for someone throwing you a glance because you're doing too much or you're not doing enough. And I remember going into the pub one night and the blues guitarist was in the band was sort of almost crying, and I said, "What's wrong with you?" And he went, "Oh, Stevie Ray Vaughan died today." And it was like he was talking about all these. And he would mention other musicians, and I'd go away and magpie and learn those things. Yeah. So I've always been lucky enough to work with people that were older, and that's the same with the Straubs, the same with Yes, the same with Bob Catley's band when I was in Bob Catley's band, and Clyde. These people have always been older than me. Yeah. And I've always kind of liked that, being the baby in the band and learning more. And that does chime with that Miles Davis thing, that you feel more challenged than if you are just playing with a bunch of people that sort of look at you in awe and sort of go, "Oh, you've done all these things." It's great to work with people that make you the best player you can be. Sure.
Anyway, I'd like to thank you for doing this, and the best of luck with that collaborations box set from Burning Shed, isn't it? From Burning Shed.
Yeah. It's out on April the 11th, and it's there's a single actually released from it, which is Manufacturing, which is on my YouTube channel. Yeah. And I think there's going to be a teaser video going up there in the next few days as well, so people can have a listen and sort of go, "Oh yeah, that's great," or "Not my sort of thing." I'll like something I don't like.
Well, I shall just pre-order it anyway. But Ravens and Lullabies is actually in that box, isn't it? I believe.
It is.
Right? Yeah. Anyway, best of luck with that. I'm sure you don't need it. And thank you so much for doing this interview. And I wish you goodbye.
That's brilliant. Thank you ever so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.